She isn't silent because she has nothing to say. She's silent because her mind is saying too much, all at once. Most people think silence means peace, but for her, silence is where the noise begins. Every word she doesn't say turns into 10 thoughts she can't stop. Every pause becomes analysis. Every small moment gets replayed again and again. And the most dangerous part? You'll never hear any of it out loud. Stay with me till the end, because the last insight explains the thought she never speaks, but never stops thinking. Silence doesn't arrive suddenly in her mind. It builds. It starts when emotions don't find a safe place to land. When a thought forms, but there's no space where it feels understood. So instead of speaking, she holds it. First, it feels controlled. She tells herself she's just being thoughtful, that staying quiet is maturity. But the mind doesn't like unfinished conversations. When expression is delayed, the brain doesn't rest, it loops. One moment becomes many versions. One sentence becomes 10 interpretations. One silence becomes a story she keeps rewriting alone. This is where overthinking is born. Not from weakness, not from drama, but from emotional processing without external grounding. Her mind starts asking questions that never get answered out loud. Did I say too much? Did I say too little? What did that tone mean? Why didn't they respond the way I expected? And because no one is correcting these thoughts, they begin correcting each other endlessly. Silence gives imagination too much power. The human brain is a pattern-making machine. When information is missing, it fills the gaps. And the gaps created by silence are the most dangerous ones, because they're filled with assumptions, not facts. Over time, her thinking shifts from curiosity to protection. She doesn't just wonder anymore. She prepares for disappointment, prepares for rejection, prepares for being misunderstood again. So she thinks ahead. She predicts outcomes. She rehearses conversations that may never happen. This isn't obsession. It's emotional self-defense. Because speaking and not being understood hurts more than staying silent and carrying the weight alone. But here's what most people miss. Silence doesn't calm her mind. It accelerates it. Every unsaid feeling stays active, like an open app running in the background, draining energy without notice. That's why she can look calm, but feel exhausted. That's why she can seem distant, but internally overwhelmed. Overthinking in silence slowly disconnects her from the present moment. She's physically there, but mentally somewhere else, replaying, analyzing, preparing. And the longer this continues, the harder it becomes to speak at all. Because now, saying one thing feels like opening the door to everything she's been holding. So she waits for the perfect moment, the perfect wording, the perfect safety, and perfection never arrives. Silence becomes a habit. Overthinking becomes the default language of her emotions. And this is the quiet tragedy. People around her assume she's fine because she isn't complaining. They assume she's strong because she isn't asking. They assume she doesn't care because she isn't reacting. But inside, her mind is doing the work of 10 conversations alone. This is why silence feels heavier for her than words. Words release pressure. Silence multiplies it. And unless this cycle is understood, overthinking doesn't fade. it deepens. Overthinking in silence doesn't exist on its own. It feeds on one deeper thing: uncertainty in emotional safety. When she doesn't know where she stands emotionally, her mind tries to stand in for clarity. And the mind is not designed to replace reassurance. It's designed to search for it. So when reassurance is missing, the search never ends. This is why overthinking becomes strongest in relationships where things are almost good. Not clearly bad, not clearly safe. Mixed signals are fuel. A warm message one day, distance the next. Affection without consistency. Her nervous system notices patterns before logic does. And when patterns feel unstable, the brain enters alert mode. She starts scanning tone, timing, micro changes in behavior, not because she wants control, but because predictability equals safety. Silence from the outside creates noise on the inside. And here's something rarely said out loud. Overthinking is not about the other person. It's about losing emotional orientation. When emotional landmarks disappear, the mind keeps circling the same thoughts, trying to find ground. This is where attachment plays a quiet role. If she's emotionally invested, silence feels heavier, because the mind assigns meaning to absence based on importance. What matters less, we let go easily. What matters deeply, the mind refuses to drop. So when something important goes unspoken, it doesn't disappear, it multiplies. She begins holding conversations that never happened, answering questions that were never asked, preparing for outcomes that may never arrive. And slowly something shifts. Her mind stops asking, "What is happening?" and starts asking, "What's wrong with me?" This is the most dangerous turn, because now silence doesn't just create confusion, it creates self-doubt. She starts internalizing the uncertainty. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe I shouldn't feel this way. And the more she questions herself, the less likely she is to speak. Silence becomes protection again, not from others, but from self-judgment. This is why telling her to just stop overthinking never works, because overthinking isn't a habit she chose. It's a system her mind built to survive emotional ambiguity. Until clarity replaces ambiguity, the mind will keep looping. And here's the quiet truth most people never realize. She isn't overthinking because she's emotional. She's overthinking because she's emotionally alone in her thoughts. When emotions are shared, they settle. When they're carried alone, they spiral. That's why reassurance calms her instantly, not because she needs validation, but because clarity shuts down the loop. The mind relaxes when it knows where it stands. But when clarity never arrives, something else happens. Overthinking slowly turns into emotional withdrawal, because the mind eventually gets tired. And when it does, she doesn't speak more, she speaks less, she disconnects, she becomes quieter. Not because she has nothing to say, but because she's already said everything 1,000 times, inside her own head. When overthinking stays unresolved for too long, it doesn't just stay in the mind. It changes behavior. This is where silence quietly turns into distance. At first, the distance is internal. She still shows up. She still responds. She still listens. But something subtle shifts. the emotional intensity begins to fade, not because she cares less, but because caring has become exhausting. The mind cannot stay in a constant state of alert forever, so it adapts, and the adaptation looks like detachment. She stops asking questions, not because they disappeared, but because asking feels pointless. She stops sharing small thoughts, not because they don't matter, but because explaining feels heavy. She stops reacting, not because she's indifferent, but because reacting restarts the mental loop she's trying to escape. This is where many people misunderstand her completely. They think she changed. She became cold. She doesn't feel the same anymore. But the truth is far quieter. She didn't lose feelings. She lost the energy to keep carrying them alone. Overthinking drains emotional fuel. Every replayed conversation takes a little more out of her. Every unanswered question adds weight. Every silence confirms the fear that speaking won't bring relief. So the mind chooses the only relief it can find: emotional withdrawal. This is not a decision. It's a shutdown. Psychologically, this is the nervous system protecting itself. When emotional effort is not met with clarity, the system reduces investment to avoid overload. This is why silence doesn't always explode into conflict. Sometimes it dissolves into quiet disappearance. And here's the painful irony. The more she withdraws to find peace, the more others interpret it as disinterest, which creates even more silence. The loop completes itself. At this stage, overthinking changes form. It's no longer loud anxiety. It becomes quiet resignation. She doesn't spiral as much anymore because she has already assumed the ending. This is why, when she finally speaks less, it's often too late. Not because the problem is unsolvable, but because her mind already solved it internally. She made peace with an outcome you never discussed. And once that internal closure forms, reopening the conversation feels risky, because reopening means reopening the loop. So she stays silent again, not out of confusion, but out of emotional fatigue. This is where attraction, connection, and presence start fading. Not dramatically, but steadily. And most people never notice until it's gone. They ask, why didn't she say something earlier? But she did, just not out loud. Her mind said everything, again and again, until it couldn't anymore. This is why silence should never be mistaken for calm. And overthinking should never be mistaken for imagination. It is the mind's attempt to survive uncertainty without support. And unless that uncertainty is addressed, the silence doesn't end. It deepens. Silence doesn't mean she has nothing to say. It means she's been saying it to herself for too long. Overthinking in silence isn't a flaw. It's a response to uncertainty, a response to emotional gaps, a response to caring without clarity. When feelings don't find understanding, the mind takes over the work of expression. And when the mind works alone for too long, it doesn't grow louder, it grows tired. That tiredness looks like distance. It looks like detachment. It looks like she changed. But what really happened is simpler. She learned that silence costs less than speaking. She learned that holding thoughts feels safer than releasing them. She learned to protect her energy by pulling inward. And once the mind adapts to silence, breaking it feels more dangerous than keeping it. This is why her quiet should never be ignored, and her overthinking should never be dismissed. Because by the time she stops thinking out loud, she has already thought everything through. And when silence finally feels peaceful to her, it's often because she has let go, not of words, but of hope that they would be understood. If this video felt uncomfortably familiar, if it explains something you've never been able to put into words, subscribe to this channel. Because here, we don't rush emotions. We understand them. And sometimes, understanding is the only closure the mind needs.